Why is change so difficult? A question we always have to ask ourselves is, when we expect so many people to change, why do we by ourselves struggle so much to change our lives? And I'm not even talking about the times of a global pandemic. I'm talking about times where we just had our so-called daily business to do, and suddenly some disruptor happened on the market, or the markets change, or clients have new demands, and we have to change. Why do we struggle? And in the recent past, I always started this podcast with telling you what happened last week, and I will do so as well this week. However, this week we have not only bad news of what happened, we also have some good news. Some of them are really good, and some of them are good-ish, as people from the UK would say. The whole concept of ish doesn't exist in the German-speaking world. So I don't want to get into too much detail about the royals again, because I am neither a royalist nor am I an expert on the royal family. However, we now heard that after the Meghan Markle interview, the royal family now said that they're going to deal with the very concerning accusations of, the royal family said that the accusations of racism were very concerning, and they will deal with it internally. Well, we all know what that means. When you work for an organization and you make an accusation and they admit that they have done it wrong, and then they say, we're going to deal with that internally, it means nothing is going to change. And I'm not sure if the royal family did a wise choice by doing so. By the way, last Monday, I did an extra edition of the podcast only talking about that interview with Alan Stevens, international expert on reputation, PR and media communication. So maybe you want to listen to that. By the way, Piers Morgan, very well-known TV host or former TV host from Good Morning Britain, stormed out of the studio after he was criticized how he dealt with Meghan Markle. He wasn't able to take 2 minutes of criticism, which is surprising because Mr. Morgan normally tends to grill people who disagree with him. And well, let's face it, we are all very sure that Piers Morgan, with his pay me to be controversial attitude, will reappear on some other network. However, there are other news. For example, Disney now admits that they had some issues with diversity, and they now have a diversity council. Diversity council. Sounds very good, doesn't it? So who is leading these diversity councils? And well, the leaders were now announced last week, and the leaders are Bob Chapek and Bob Iger. Both long-standing Disney executives, male, white, straight, cisgender, with exactly zero track record on the diversity issue. You know, last week we had this great moment where on Monday, remember International Women's Day? Last Monday, where people could actually pretend that they care about women's rights for one day, and many men just made it all about themselves and talking about, oh, I just spoke here and I spoke there and I did this and did that, while for the rest of the year, for the next 364 days, they stay absolutely silent on the whole issue, except for, of course, last Sunday, there was Mother's Day, so they all praised their mother. So 2 days a year and you think you're a better person. So Disney failed with the diversity council here. I hope they're going to change their decision in the very near future, because what they communicate right now is they simply want to keep it under control so that not, in high commas, the wrong people get a say. Whoever the wrong people might be, but Disney seems to fear that underlying issues might come to surface. Not very well done, Disney. Not very well done. And if you think it can't get any worse, and I promise you after that we get to better news, if you can't think it can't get any worse, then of course someone pops up in the football news for our American listeners talking about soccer. Joachim Löw, the German national football manager, steps down. He steps down after the next competition, the next international competition, and will leave a space where now someone can fill in. And of course, immediately the board of the German Football Association, Deutsche Fußballbund, DFB, stepped up. And Oliver Bierhoff, who is the director for the national team and the consultant at the German Football Association, said he can only think of a German manager for the German national team. Well, it looks like that not only he looks for a German, he looks for a male, white, straight, cisgender German. And that, again, brought a discussion to surface which shows how deeply rooted the problems are we still have. And that is a huge part of change. Because now, of course, when I said we should look international. It is very common. It is very common now in the corporate world that people work all over the world, always focusing on their skills. Of course, there is still a lot of discrimination going on, but at least considering international candidates is very common right now. It's very common in the corporate world, and it's very common in many sports. And of course, immediately when I said, how can the German national football team only be led by a German person? Of course, people said, could you name one German who was ever manager of a national team somewhere outside Germany? Because that's the usual response by people who normally are a bit biased about gender or racial or sexual orientation issues or any diversity issues. Actually, they always say, oh, what about that? It's called whataboutism, a really bad strategy if you really want to lose in a discussion or argument. That is the premium way how to go for it. So I did research and looked at where actually were the Germans, were there any Germans who ever were managers of other football teams than the German one. And within the next 60 seconds, you will hear a lot of names and a lot of nations. So sit down, buckle up, and here we go. Jürgen Klinsmann in the USA, Volker Finke in Cameroon, Klaus-Dieter Pagels in Zimbabwe, Gernot Rohr in Gabon, Niger, Burkina Faso, Winfried Schäfer in Jamaica, Bernd Stange in Australia, Oman, Iraq, White Russia, Belarus, and Singapore, Uli Stielicke in Ivory Coast and South Korea, Falco Götz in Vietnam, Lothar Matthäus in Hungary and Bulgaria, Otto Rehhagel in Greece, Michael Skibbe in Turkey and Greece, Bertie Fuchs in Kuwait, Scotland, Nigeria and Azerbaijan. And when you think it can't get any better, wait for it. Otto Pfister in Rwanda, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Congo, Ghana, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Togo, Cameroon, Trinidad and Tobago. And when you think this can't get any better, here's the final. Rudi Gutendorf in Chile, Bolivia, Venezuela, Trinidad, Grenada, Antigua, Botswana, Australia, New Caledonia, Nepal, Tonga, Tanzania, Ghana, then going back to Nepal, Fiji, Iran, China, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Rwanda, and Samoa. And by the way, of course, immediately after the person heard my research, the person said, oh, these are all, and then that's what he said. I apologize in advance. That person then said, oh, these are all developing countries when it comes to playing football. Is there any first world nation where we had any other nation being the manager? And not only is this statement absolutely appalling, but of course I did research and I thought, well, maybe I just look at England, because England is, as we all know, the home of football, as many say, although when we look into the history, there were other nations where football was played earlier. But let's just stick to the song Football's Coming Home. And England, by the way, for years had Sven-Göran Eriksson, who's Swedish. So the only national team who never had any diversity, never had any non-German as a manager is Germany. And when we look into German history, that is even more appalling than the statement from Oliver Bierhoff itself. I always wonder, what do people in communication at the German Football Association actually do for main living? What's their main job? Or maybe they have good people in communications, but just the leaders don't listen to them. That's, of course, another aspect which is possible. And, of course, immediately the same person came up and said, what about the women's national team? Isn't that diversity? So, well, surprisingly, the women's national team has women playing. How very surprising. Or did that person now think of men should play with women? No. Hopefully not. Oh, by the way, if we want to get into details on the German Football Association again, the only ever national manager being laid off in Germany ever. Some people left, some people didn't want to continue, some people retired. No one was ever fired except Steffi Jones. And Steffi Jones, a black American woman with German American nationality, to be precise, but the only ever laid off, which means the only person ever fired on a national manager's level by the German Football Association, was the only black woman they ever had on staff. Congratulations, German Football Associations. Welcome to the 1700s. But there are good news, and I promised you to go for good news now. And I start with a bit of a small good news. It sounds good in the first place, but when I did the research, it turned out it was a bit less great than I thought. We had International Women's Day, as you know, last Monday, and they said the gender pay gap is now smaller than before. And I wondered, why doesn't the headline contain the data. Because normally you say, no one would ever put a headline out there and say, oh, unemployment is lower. People would say unemployment just went down by 6%. So why do we have the gender pay gap is lower than before? So I did the research. Yes, the gender pay gap, the difference between men and women being paid differently, is smaller than before. 1%. 1% less than before. And by the way, when you now think, oh, did it go from like 5% to 4%? No, it didn't. It went from 19% to 18%. So men still get paid 1/5 more. By the way, in average 1/5 more than women. That's where we are. But there are genuinely good news. There are some genuinely good news. So for example, the European Union declared Europe an LGBTQIA plus freedom zone. And that is a direct reaction to what happened in Poland. Some districts in Poland declared themselves LGBT-free zones, which is, of course, a horrible statement of discrimination in Poland. Very not concerning. It's deeply worrying what's happening there in Poland. And the European Union made unambiguously clear that discrimination will not be tolerated. However, of course, people, and I also received emails about this, people ask me, do you have any examples where a company, for a good cause, for just doing the right thing, just let go of business? So for example, they said, we can't accept that XYZ happened in this country, and therefore we do not do the business worth $10 million. And it's quite hard, it is surprisingly hard to find any of these examples, because normally you get some sort of diversity statement and then they do the business anyway, which is of course not great. But there is an excellent example, and the example is Hendrix Grassoden. What do they produce? Lawn. They produce lawn. And I know that company just by pure coincidence. I've been a referee for a very long time, for more than 20 years in football. And of course, you know the large and big production companies, because the lawn is what you play on. And Hendrix Grassoden produces lawn. You can put it in your garden, you can put it in your private garden, or you can put it in stadiums. What football clubs did, because it's a high quality production company of excellent lawn. And they were awarded a major contract for World Cup in 2022 in Qatar. And you know what they said? They said, thank you very much, but no. The company Hendrix Grassoden, and let's face it, delivering lawn for the World Cup is first highly profitable. Second, it is amazing advertising. And third, you will gain a lot of business afterwards for only being able to advertise that you were the supplier for World Cup. And the Dutch company Hendrix Grassoden, they said no, because they said that the human rights violations in Qatar are so severe and so unacceptable, and the behavior of the FIFA is so appalling that they don't want to be in connection with that competition. And now we're talking, because now we have to deeply look at who is still connected with World Cup. And by the way, how do all your mission and vision and value statements and the diversity statements you have, how do all these play along with a Qatari World Cup given away under debatable and still investigated circumstances, while at the same time it is crystal clear, and we have proof and evidence, that human rights violation in the non-democratic country of Qatar are happening daily? Do you want to connect your business with these values? And just to be very clear, because people will of course and ask me, especially since last week, they asked me, Niels, when you criticize these instances, and I did it publicly, when you follow me on Facebook, my Facebook profile is 100% public, so just feel free to follow me there. All my social media is 100% public. You're not going to miss anything by only following instead of befriending me. Connect me, follow me, whatever you want to do, you always see the same. It's all 100% public. And I made unambiguously clear that I am not going to watch World Cup 2022 due to what happened in the circumstances on the way to World Cup 2022. Of course, when people said, oh, Qatar, it's all bribery, said, we need proof and evidence. The allegation alone is not enough. But when proof and evidence came in, and really hard proof and evidence of human rights violations and more than debatable behavior, I decided that I am not going to do anything else than, probably because I watch evening news, get the results and hear which teams won today. It's the first World Cup where I did that. It's the first World Cup where I will do that based on values. And I hope that many people will follow this example and make FIFA rethink their approach. And by the way, before we get into how we deal with these changes, because I know that many of these changes will feel uncomfortable for many, especially when you are in the privileged position. It is not even about that. Change is difficult on the even most basic levels. And I'm just going to give you an example. Last week, an NFT was sold. And now you will wonder, what is an NFT? So the founder of Twitter sold his very first tweet. And now you wonder, how do you want to sell a tweet? A tweet is only digital. How do you own a tweet? Do you print it, put it on your wall? Well, that doesn't really work because you can print it, but I can print it as well. So that would not really give away ownership. But there's a technology called NFT, non-fungible token. And that proves ownership. Another JPEG, by the way, in the same week was auctioned off by Sotheby's for more than $60 million. An NFT again proved ownership. And it was less than 24 hours that people said, oh, NFT, digital token for ownership. Digital token for ownership is all nonsense. We need paper. We need notary public signing that off. We need to put it into some sort of government-led organization. It's all nonsense. So first, these people clearly had no idea about the technology. And second, people who look at something and without doing any further investigation say it's all nonsense, clearly are not willing to change. It's not that they are unable to change, they are unwilling to change. Because we heard exactly the same when blockchain came out, which is already successfully used in other contexts than Bitcoin. Or when you heard about internet, where they said, all nonsense, we don't need it. Maybe you remember when you had a different music taste than your parents, and you listened to new and more modern music, and they said it's all nonsense. The all nonsense idea, throwing the all nonsense statement at someone after you haven't done any research, clearly shows that you are unsuitable for any kind of leadership position. Because there are multiple problems. And now we get into the problems. And then, of course, as with every podcast, we're going to look into how can we do better. So first, one of the main problems is change is often only seen as a project. People think it's temporary, and it's not. You don't have an unfrozen organization, then you do a change, and then you refreeze the organization. I'm fully aware of different change models, and of course I know the 1947 Levine model. It's all known. But as you could say, by the age of the model, it is simply outdated. And you can only apply it in very special, very, let's say, singular contexts where people act with no interaction to any other department or any other circumstance, which hardly ever happens in today's times. So change is not a project. Of course, you have change projects to put a structure to it. And project management is important, and having a project management office, etc. That's all very important. However, you cannot say the project is the change, because change constantly happens. That's why at the moment you often have to change multiple change projects at the same time. Leadership becomes very complicated because you have to balance out how many change projects are you able to give to the organization and to your people, to not give them too much to do or overwhelm them with the amount of changes and lose their followership. That's what makes leadership so complicated. However, that's only one part of the problem. Change is more than a project. Change is a state. And it's a constant state of the organizations in today's times. But aspect number two is change is so difficult because often the intentions are not transparently communicated. Remember when for the very first time you were highly motivated because you wanted to update the production? Just putting new industrial machinery and then suddenly, by coincidence, without announcing it before, laying off 300 people because you don't need them anymore, suddenly people didn't trust you with the next change anymore. How very surprising. I know how challenging it can, I know by my own business how challenging it can be that you have to announce to people, we have a more modern and streamlined approach. We don't need 1,000 workers anymore. Of course, my business was not at that size, but when you have a modernization process and you know you need less workers afterwards, communicate it openly, put up a social plan. How do you want to deal with these people? Because when you simply lay them off, of course, your employer's brand will have a significant damage. You will have a lot of bad press, and all the money you think you can now save because you didn't pay any kind of compensations, you didn't do any settlements, you didn't talk to anyone. So all the money you saved in the first place, you have to spend twice, 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much to only recover from the damage your employer's brand now suffers from. So your intentions must be very clear from the very beginning, and you should get professional advice on how to communicate that properly. Aspect number 3, change is often led by the people who know exactly what anyone else has to do, and but just by coincidence, they can stay exactly the same. Just look at the airline industry right now. CEOs and board level people say, oh, all the airline industry will change significantly after the pandemic is coming to an end. However, everyone has to face changes, while at the same time on board level you don't see any changes. Of course, not with every airline. Some airlines are doing very well, but many airlines are not. Many airlines, you have a senior leadership level on board level, where people don't change at all. And when they say, oh, we didn't get a bonus that year, come on, you didn't generate any profits. So when you don't generate profits, of course, you don't get a bonus. That's just common sense. So when you see the change is led by people who are not affected by it, what you really need is you need people from tactical or operational level who are dealing with the change by themselves. And these people are, and you need, by the way, support by the opinion leaders. Opinion leaders can be people who formally have nothing to say, however, anyone listens to them. So don't only stick to the formal hierarchical pyramid which you might have as a picture on the wall or on your computer. Look at who is the true opinion leader. And by the way, often this change process comes along with an external factor. So for example, training sessions, or you have a big event where you have professional speakers giving a speech. You might have coaches or consultants coming in, a mentoring process to deal with the change. And often you have project or interim managers who help you with the change. And I'm happy to talk with you about that. I've done that many times. You find my email address in the show notes of this podcast. But we're getting now to the aspects of how to do better with all the problems we now faced. So we now know that change is not only a project. Intentions must be clearly communicated. And of course, change must be led by the people who are affected. If you're not affected, you need someone, an opinion leader who supports you. So how to do better? Aspect number 1, change is a state, and it's a constant state. Change will not go away, and people have to be very aware of that. Every single time when you hear someone asking the question, when do we get back to normal? When will the stability come back? It will never come back, because change is a constant state of where we're in now. My business is not a business where the world is relying on. My business is changing every single day. Social media becomes more and more relevant, even in my business, which took a long way before social media really had a breakthrough. I mean, except the motivational, inspirational chumbawamba of no real economical value. But change is a constant state, and we have to deal with it. I offer digital delivery, which means remote delivery, from a very early time, because my first employer did that. My first employer after university was GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical company. And when they said, we are going to deliver training for doctors via the internet with bundling ISDN lines, everyone said, this is not how training works. And today, no one would dare to make that statement ever again. So we have to constantly change our approach to business. There is never, ever again, the standard delivery of just daily business with no change whatsoever. However, and part 2 of how to do better is you need to have the right staff for that, which means you need the best people, you need the best culture, and that comes along with, yes, the best payment. If you say, oh, we are so competitive, there's hardly any money in this industry, we pay rock bottom salaries, but we expect amazingly motivated people with an amazing culture, so all the best people come to us. No, they won't. They simply won't. When you think you get the best people and the best culture for very little money, it will not happen. You might have 1 or 2 lucky picks until they realize where they are and what they do, and then they will simply apply somewhere else and leave your organization, and they definitely will not come back. But you need the right staff which fits to the right attitude towards change, because you cannot do it on your own. Aspect number 3 of how to do it better, always consider change as a source of innovation, because if you deny the innovation, you will be wiped off the market in the short term, mid-term, or long term. Just remember what happened when apps came on the market. And all the organizations that said, oh, you have to deal with change constantly. And then I'll just give you one example. Transport apps came on the market. So for example, My Taxi in Germany, which is now called Free Now, or Uber, or Bolt, or Get, or Halo, or how all these apps are called. Immediately, the reaction was not, oh, hello, innovation, we're going to adopt. The first innovation was, can we get a law to make them illegal? And no, you can't, because you cannot make innovation illegal, especially not when there is no foundation for it. And of course, these organizations have seen some backlashes because they didn't behave, some of them. For example, Uber lost 2 major lawsuits just recently. But that was about employment. When, of course, you tell people when to work, then, of course, they're not self-employed. That is just common sense. However, many of these apps offer solutions which are more flexible for the consumer and more flexible for the person working. And that simply means that you have to change. When you, for example, a classic taxi company. It is very important that you see change as an innovation, but it's always easier said than done. You always say innovation constantly happens, and as soon as your own organization is affected, and I saw it within my own industry. Last week, I had a chat with someone who is not in my market anymore. It was the person that said at the end of last year, oh, we're all getting back to on-site training because no one wants remote delivery. I just translate that to you. That man basically said, I can't deal with technology, so I just ignore it and hope it will become better. Well, it didn't become better until the end of the year, so he had to go back into employment. There's no shame in that, but his business, of course, collapsed because he was unwilling to change. What was his main topic? Innovation and change. And there we are. So people suddenly are very reluctant to innovation and change as soon as they are affected by themselves. So think of it. Aspect number 1, change is a constant state. Aspect number 2, you need the right staff for it. Best people, best culture comes along with best payment. And best payment, by the way, can be in the long run, because sometimes people approach me. I received emails a couple of weeks ago where someone said, I work for the public hand. We never pay the highest salary. So we never get the best people, right? And I said, no, you're wrong, because the public hand, for example, in Germany, doesn't have the highest salary, but they have the safest jobs and the highest pension in relation to what you paid into the system. So when someone says, I am more in for the long run, so for example, I want a job which gives me a very good pension, then that is the brilliant payment. The payment from the public pension system in Germany is way less, especially when you're young today. And the right people, the right staff will help you with the best people, best culture, and best payment. You will get the best results. And then step number 3, seeing change as a source of innovation, because otherwise, if you deny the change and you deny to innovate, you will be wiped off the market in the short, mid, or long term. When you embrace change and technology and acknowledge that you need the best people, the best culture, with the best payment to make change a constant, always omnipresent part of your business, then for sure you will succeed whatever you do with your organization. I wish you all the best implementing this with your organization. Happy to have a chat with you. You find the email in the show notes of my podcast. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.